welcome everyone to The Current. This is the North Central Region Water Network's Speed Networking webinar series. I hope you all are staying safe and healthy, and glad you are choosing to socially engage with us, even though we are physically distant. As I said before, I'm Rebecca Power. I'm joining from the University of Wisconsin, Madison Division of Extension, and I will be your moderator. Since some of you maybe knew the North Central Region Water Network, we are an extension-led collaboration among land-grant universities and our partners in 12 upper Midwestern states. So today, our topic is flood prevention. As we know, water is not stopping for this COVID-19 epidemic, this pandemic that we are in. And many of you are on the forefront of managing water resources in one way or another, in addition to managing everything that's going on with COVID-19. As spring arrives throughout much of the region, many of us have the potential for flooding on our minds as we continue to recover from last year, or try to recover from last year, and look forward to hopefully a better planting season in 2020. Again, as with COVID-19, we during this series or this presentation today, we're going to be spanning the immediate, what we need to be doing right now, or some information on what's happening right now, but also looking to the future and some opportunities for addressing flood prevention and mitigating the negative impacts from flooding in the longer term, and in doing some of that kind of longer term research and planning. Before we introduce our speakers, a few notes to you all as participants. We try to make these participatory sessions as much as possible. So you should be able to submit your questions for presenters in the chat box, and that chat box is accessible through the purple Collaborate panel, this little purple tab in the lower right-hand corner of your webinar screen. And we'll have a dedicated Q&A session following our last presentations. We try to leave a good amount of time at the end for your questions, and I will be reading those once we get to that point. A phone-in option, if you're having any issues with audio, a phone-in option can be accessed by opening the session menu in the upper left-hand area of your webinar screen and selecting Use Your Phone for Audio. All right, so today's presenters: Corey Loveland, Service Coordination Hydrologist for NOAA National Weather Service at the North Central River Forecast Center; Witold Krajewski, Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Iowa and Director of the Iowa Flood Center; and last but not least, Laura Edwards, South Dakota State University Extension State Climatologist. You can follow the North Central Water Network at North Central H2O, and we have a hashtag The Current on Twitter for live tweets if you're doing that or want to clue people in to the information that you're going to receive here today. So a little note about that, and let's get on with it. So Corey Loveland is our first presenter. And as I said, Corey is the Service Coordination Hydrologist for the National Weather Service at the North Central River Forecast Center. And Corey serves as the liaison between the River Forecast Center and federal, state, and tribal agencies throughout the Mississippi River, Hudson Bay, and Great Lakes Basin. So we're really fortunate to have Corey with us today. I'm not going to read the rest of that. You can skim the rest of his bio with your capable eyes there, and we'll go ahead and get into Corey's information. So thank you so much, Corey.
Great, thank you so much, Janice. I hope everyone is doing well. Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the North Central River Forecast Center and what we do. If you want to go to the next slide, please.
You should be able to, yep, can you advance?
Okay, sorry about that. All right. All right, so the National Weather Service, we are divided into two areas. We have weather forecast offices, and we also have river forecast centers. The weather forecast offices, the boundaries are mostly divided by radar coverages, and we have about 122 of those offices. On the other side, the river forecast centers, there's 13 of us across the United States, and ours is called the North Central River Forecast Center. There's also an RFC up in Anchorage, Alaska, that covers the state of Alaska and Hawaii as well. So most of our areas, mostly, as you can map on the right, most of our areas mostly west of both Lake Huron and Lake Erie. See if I can, there we go. Okay. So roughly we have three major drainages that we model. Most river forecast centers have one basin and maybe two. And so we're kind of unique in that area. And so it's color coordinated here. The basin that most people see or on the news or whatever is the Mississippi River drainage. That's the demarcated there in the green. And then up north, the Red River of the North, some of you may have learned or know a little bit about that. That's in the Hudson River or the Hudson Bay drainage. And then, of course, we have the rivers that drain into the Great Lakes. They're marketed in red there. So overall, we have around 400 forecast points throughout our area. And those red little dots are all those forecast point locations. And of those, we have around 950 sub-watersheds within our area. So you might have remembered grade school, the water cycle, when you learned that in school. And so essentially what we do here at the River Forecast Center is we try to, we attempt to simulate that water cycle in our model. And so you have, of course, the rainfall that comes from the sky, is either rain or snow, comes onto the earth, and then basically, you know, collects into the drainages, and we model that in our segments. We have over 1,000 segments within our model, and on the graphic to the right just shows the complexity of all the individualized basins. That's about the 1,000 basins that we model inside and at the River Forecast Center. And so you can see that soils play a critical role in what we do. And going to the next slide here, so someone might ask, you know, what is the data that we collect, and what do we use? So I'm going to start off to the lower left, and I'm going to go clockwise. So all the information that goes into our model, and essentially what I'm looking at is in the middle there, the screen there is kind of a snapshot of what our model looks like, a hydrograph, and we look at the amount of moisture in the soil, and we model the snowpack. So on the lower left, the weather observations. Those the rain gauge data, temperature data. We get that on usually a 15-minute basis, if not an hourly basis. And then we get a lot of river gauge data. That's mostly from the USGS, other state agencies that collect that data, and it's transmitted via satellite or cell phone technology to our model. Of course, we work a lot with reservoir releases. The Army Corps of Engineers is the primary agency that we work with them. So they tell us what releases they're going to do, and we in turn tell them what inflows they're going to get so they can operate their reservoirs. In the wintertime, snow data is very important. So we get a lot of information on the snowpack, the snow water equivalent, and all that information that goes into our model. And then obviously we want to know what rainfall has happened. So we look at both radar precipitation estimates and also the satellite as well. So that's put into our model. And then we also look at the forecast. We look at what are the temperature forecasts and what are the precipitation forecasts in the short term, mainly in the next 7 days. But we also look at what are the climatic predictions as well, like the seasonal predictions for both weather, for both temperature and precipitation. So I'm going to let you in on a few secrets here. Oh, I skipped 2 slides. So a little bit of some of the forecasting secrets here. Yes, sometimes we do throw darts at the dartboard. I'm just joking, but that what happens really behind the big black curtain. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So going to the next slide. I know this slide is really busy, but I tried to put everything we do in one slide. So if you look at the graphic on the left, that's the raw model output of our modeling, and we as forecasters put in our different model parameter adjustments or modifications, what we call them, and that in turn produces what we think is going to happen, and that's the graphic to the right. And so of all the models that go into our one model, we have a snow model, we have a soil moisture model, we have a model that produces a unit hydrograph, and of course I talked a little bit about the reservoir modeling as well. And so all those models simulate the physical process of the water cycle, and it's analyzed on a 6-hour time step. And we look at those about 2 times a day, at around 7 a.m. in the morning Central Time, and also 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time as well. We sometimes will look at them a little bit more as well if we're in flooding situations as we are now. But our goal is to basically accurately, as best as we can, simulate the stream flow with the observations and the reasonable forecasts. And so we look at, we calibrate our model, and that's based on historical data running from 1948 to 2012. And we're currently working on updating that to at least 2018 to get the most current data in there. And one thing of note is we only make adjustments when necessary or justified, as far as tracking it to a physical process, whether we melt a little bit of snow, or we add a little bit of rainfall, or we moisten the soils a little bit, based on anecdotal data that we get from the field or the weather forecast offices or people that call in and give us that information. That's why it's really critical that we get that information. So this is our final product here. It's color-coded. Some of you have probably seen this, probably most of you. So our flood forecasts are categorized in flood thresholds. And so there's the major flood stage, that's in purple. Our moderate flood stage is always in red. And then our minor flood stage is always in orange. And you might see a yellow category there, and that's action stage, or what we call near flood stage. Basically, it's what we're seeing that's kind of on our radar, so to speak, is what we might see as far as flooding. So I'll break this down. On the left-hand side is the observed stage, or the height, the blue line or the blue dots there. And then on the right side, you have the National Weather Service forecast, the green line or the green dots there. And so you'll see that vertical blue dotted line, and that's basically the current time. So the line that divides the observations with the forecast points there. So going to, so the next slide here. So someone might ask, what are the primary spring snowmelt flooding drivers out there? And so the ones that I have highlighted, the first 3 in bold here, those are the current, or the model, that what we see, the existing conditions. And the last 4 have a question mark in front of them, and I put that there because those are the ones that are kind of the wild cards that happen in the spring, that you're not quite sure what's going to happen. So let me break it down. So the first one with the snowpack, that's essentially what's going to drive the spring snowmelt, and especially looking at the water content of the snow. You might hear the term snow water equivalent. So that's really important. The second one we look at is the soil moisture. What's in that? And usually that's a carryover of the fall or the fall rains that we saw. So obviously, if you have a very wet fall, you're going to have very wet soils in the springtime, and that's going to play a key role in the melt. The third one is the soil conditions, whether they're frozen soils and also frost steps as well. So that's the infiltration versus the runoff. If you get infiltration, then that's good. Runoff, you'll get large amounts of runoff if you have frozen soils. So the wild card is the spring precipitation, whether that's rain or snow, and also the timing, because you can have different forms and you can get different types of inputs onto the snow that can cause that flooding. The timing is important as well. Obviously, the earlier the better. As far as the melt is better, because if you get that before the spring rains, then you're offsetting the melt versus the melt with in conjunction with the spring rains. And then obviously temperatures and the spatial distribution of the melting is a big factor as well. If you get a quick or substantial temperature changes, then you're going to get an onset of rapid melt versus a gradual warm up. And then of course ice jams or flow obstructions are also a wild card in the spring, because if you have high flows or very cold temperatures, you could get ice jams that could cause minor or moderate flooding on the basins. So we do spring flood outlooks, and they're issued every year. So every early February, we come out with a spring flood outlook, and it basically outlines what's going to happen in the next 90 days. And then we do an update to that initial outlook in early March. We're basically looking at the flood potential, the outlook, looking at what's in the model, and the forecasted short-term weather. It's essentially a comprehensive review of all the conditions of snow, the soil conditions, the wetness of them, the frost depths, ice jam potential, the temperature forecast, the climate, all that. So it's kind of all wrapped into a narrative that we come out with, and also supporting graphics as well. We also collaborate with other weather forecast offices and other river forecast centers and core partners as well. So again, the purpose of that is to a heads up spring flood potential out to the public and our core partners, so that they can plan for mitigation and what they want to do. So this is what our long-term product looks like. This is essentially our ensemble streamflow prediction, or what we call ESP, we also have a web page. It's called AHAPS, the Advanced Hydrologic Prediction System, and that all this information I'm showing you is on this there, so on that website. And so this shows the greater than 50% chance of exceeding river flood levels in a 90-day window. And so again, these are color coordinated for major, moderate, and minor based on the purple, the red, and the orange colors there. And so then you can get an overview of what basins have the greatest potential to have flooding. And on the next slide, I'll show you how we break that down. When you click on an individual river forecast point, you have the option to see either the left graphic or the right graphic. And the left graphic essentially shows the chance of exceeding those thresholds in a weekly chance. So every week you'll see that different chance of exceedance there, and a subsequent percent of chance there based on the color coding there. And then on the right, you can also compare the period of the conditional simulation, or essentially what we're seeing in the model, and the chances of reaching flood compared to the historical simulation, which is the line in blue there. So the line in blue is basically the period of record from whenever the first date of the gauge that was put in till current. And the conditional simulation is what we're seeing now. So if the black line is to the left of the blue line, then that indicates a wetter than normal condition. So, and essentially it's fairly easy. You look at, like this for example has a 60% chance. If you look at the 60% line and run that up to the minor, there's a 60% chance of it reaching 14 feet or minor flood level. So it's kind of just a statistical way of looking at what are the chances of reaching those flood levels in a way that someone can plan for the spring flood. So that's pretty much what I had. I know I went through it fairly quickly. So this is my contact information here, and it looks like the slide is a little skewed, but the primary web resource there is weather.gov/NCRFC, and that's where you're going to see all the things that I showed you, especially what we call the Advanced Hydrologic Prediction System, or the AHAPS website that shows the hydrographs. So with that, I'll turn it back to Janice or whoever, and I think we're going to do questions at the end.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. And at the risk of wrecking our timeline here, did you want to say anything else quickly about this season's flooding forecast? I mean, I think some of the graphics that you showed touched on that, but just, any summary information that you want to provide people in that regard. Corey, is your mic on?
Oh, it's on now. Somehow it must have got turned off. So, all right. Sorry about that. I didn't touch it. So I'll break it down into two, the upper Mississippi and also the Red River of the North. We were very concerned about both of them as we were entering the flood season. But bottom line is for both basins, essentially, it's just been a perfect melt as far as, we had very wet soils, but the temperatures have gradually warmed up. So the melt, it was a perfect melt, just a slow melt that, melted during the day, cooled down at night. So you get that cyclical pattern, which is just perfect for the melt. But also the soils, I mentioned that they're extremely wet because we had record rainfall last year. It was the wettest of the 2019 was the wettest year on record in 125 years. And so that really scared us coming into this season. But it seems like a lot of that, since the snow just melted off really nice, a lot of those soils opened up and we're able to take in that excess moisture. Of course, we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel until we have the green up, essentially, and that's just when all the leaves on the trees and the vegetation is starting to grow and is able to take all that moisture from the soils. So the soils are still a little bit wet, and like I mentioned before, the spring precipitation is a wild card. But looking at the outlook, it looks like it's going to be fairly dry, so that's good. If we do get a big rainstorm, then all bets are off. And the worst case scenario is essentially when you're getting melt and also a rainstorm down south, and so you're getting meltwater basically going down the main stem, and in combination with the wet or the rainfall downstream, and you're mixing the two. And so that's but we're not seeing that this year. We're just seeing a good melt out, and also not so much not a whole lot of rain. So that's all I've got there.
Great, excellent, Corey. Thank you so much. Appreciate those extra tips. All right. So next, our next presenter is Witold Krajewski, who is a professor of civil and environmental engineering in the University of Iowa College of Engineering. He also holds the Rose and Joseph Summers Chair in Water Resources Engineering, and directs the Iowa Flood Center. So thank you so much, Witold, for joining us today, and look forward to your presentation.
Very much, Rebecca. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about the Iowa Flood Center for a large audience. Well, I provide the title for the talk. Well, maybe I went a little bit too far. Is this really for the nation? And then I decided to keep this title, and I have 10 minutes to justify it. So the Iowa Flood Center was established by the legislators in Iowa in 2009, following the flood of 2008. So this city of Cedar Rapids, but other places in Iowa, in a way. The legislators recognized the extent that we have at the University of Iowa. They checked with us if we would be willing, expertise that I just mentioned in the form of specialists in mechanics and mechanics, hydrology. It will celebrate the summer 100th anniversary. So 10 years ago, there was already a lot of this, history of this. So this is the exact language the bill that established the I into the possibilities that the state gave us, and also to define our activity. So they said, okay, yes, we can help. Okay, go to work. So we went to work. So I will just take you quickly through the activities involved in. Then maybe I can elaborate if you. We by doing the monitoring of inflow for flooding in 2008, there was a wide lack of information. So prototyped, built, and deployed what we call bridge sensors. So small devices distance from the water table. We installed 50 in the summer of 2010, and quickly followed those with 200 more and counting. So here what you see in is the network of so the blue are Iowa Flood Center bridge sensors, and the red are the locations where communities requested more. And we are building them as we speak. There is always, so if you want, there are 100 spots. We only have funding for another 30 or so. Do they work? Yes, they do. There's a cartoonish representation of the data together with the flood levels that we just heard about, Corey. So you can see that in this particular case, the water level, the bridge, it didn't transmit the file. When the water went down, mission started without us doing anything. So they are robust. We are very proud of the engineering that went into their construction. So we worked federal funding, but also state, developed two types of map. So the large
Witold, this is Rebecca, and we are experiencing difficulties hearing you. Your mic is cutting out periodically. We may want to switch you over, either try for another 30 seconds or a minute or so, or just we may want to switch you over to the telephone. One of our moderators is suggesting you might want to mute and unmute to see if that helps.
Okay, so I just did. There's nothing else.
Try.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's cutting out. You may want to, if you don't mind, if you could switch over to a telephone connection and try to get in that way.
Okay, and so could somebody send me the number?
Yeah, Janice, if you could put that telephone number in to the moderator chat box.
It's in the email message that I sent to you this morning.
Okay. So I apologize.
Yeah, so we definitely understand, and just as I said to everyone in the chat box, this is one of the challenges of folks working remotely. So we are happy to work with you on that. So why don't you try to go ahead and call in, and we'll just press the pause button here for just a few seconds. And thank you to all of you for bearing with us, and we'll see if we can get better audio from Witold here. I'm hoping this is going to be fairly quick, so I'm not going to switch to Laura. And if it takes longer, we'll go ahead and let Laura go while we work out the audio with Vitold. And in the meantime, yes, you will have. We will have an audio recording of this webinar, or it's an archived version of the webinar that we will have accessible on northcentralwater.org, and it's on our YouTube channel. So folks that aren't able to attend, or if folks have other things that they need to get to before we end today, you can access the recording there. I will also, while we're waiting and getting Vitold back on, I'm just going to go ahead to some of the questions that we already have in the chat box. So, Corey, there were a couple questions for you. Let me just get to those here. One question was, in the river forecasting work that you do, or flood forecasting that you do, is there consideration of last year's water levels in lakes and rivers? And Corey, Janice, if you haven't already, you may need to change Corey's permissions back for him to answer.
Yep.
Okay, Corey, can we hear you?
Yeah. All right. So, the short answer is yes and no, and that's probably not a good answer, but it's yes in the fact that I talked about our modifications that we do, and basically, and that's forecaster knowledge. We have subject matter experts that have gone through a number of floods and kind of know how and what the rivers do. And so indirectly, they'll adjust the forecast based on what conditions that we've seen, last year or in recent years, and their most recent conditions. And so that's the yes part. The no part of it is the calibration. I did mention that our calibrations run from about 1948 to 2012. So if that's the case, then a raw model output obviously doesn't incorporate last year's flood. So again, I mentioned that we're trying to update that to 2018, and even if we had that done, we still would not have 2019 in there. So hopefully, as we see these recent years of very high water times or flood conditions, that if we are able to recalibrate our models and incorporate those high water years, then the raw model output would incorporate that. But again, how we jump around that hurdle is the forecaster expertise of the area, and also again collaborating with the weather forecast offices and our partners, and trying to get the best available data out there for the wetness of the soils, and we have a lot of tools for assessing the snowpack and all that. So yeah, so we try to, obviously with a very wet last year, we want to get the best available data in our model.
Great, thank you, Corey. Janice, can we try Vitold yet, or not quite?
Does anyone have another question for me in the meantime?
We do, just
I don't see his phone coming online.
okay, well then we'll move on to another question. I thought I saw a telephone number coming online, but I may have been wrong about that. Okay, from Sean. How far, this is again for Corey, how far out do you look at precipitation forecasts when drawing the river forecast? Beyond immediate forecast precip, do you assume zero precip or long-term average precip or some other forecast?
Well, in the winter time, and that's a very good question. In the winter time, we use 48 hours of what we call QPF, or quantitative precipitation forecast, and then that's basically from October 1st to April 1st. And then from April 1st to September 30th, we use 24 hours of our forecasted precipitation. And those numbers are based on a lot of verification that we do. The primary reason is because we use 24 hours in the summer because there's a lot of what we call convective storms, a lot of uncertainty in that. The winter time, we use a longer forecast window because it's mostly snow and the precipitation is a little bit more predictable. And we don't go beyond those because just our expertise with the weather forecast offices and everything else it's really hard to get a very good handle on the precipitation, not only the forecast, or not only the timing rather, but also the areal extent of where that precipitation is going to fall. You know, especially when you throw in different factors of temperatures as well, like in the spring or late spring or even in the early fall when you're not sure if it's going to fall as rain or snow. And so that typing, we put that in our model, and the farther you're out, the less of confidence that you have in that. And so, you know, we take the certainties in there. And you know, I did mention that we look a little bit about, you know, in the climate type things like what's the general trend, but that's just basically, it's not in our model per se. It's kind of in the back of our minds of what we think we need to do as far as which way to hedge in our model. Sometimes, you know, we want to know if we need to get, you know, hedge it to a little wetter or a little bit drier, depending on what the outlook is. Hopefully that answered the question there.
Thank you very much. Okay, I know we're still working here on the audio for Vitold. And thank you, Laura, for providing that email address. I think what we're going to do is go ahead and, okay, we're going to go ahead and switch to Laura while we continue to work on the sound for Vitold. So I'm going to advance the slides here. Don't look. You're getting the preview. Don't look. All right. Thanks again for your patience, everybody. Okay. All right. All right. Laura. Laura Edwards. We're going to switch the order up here a little bit. Laura Edwards was appointed as the South Dakota State University Extension State Climatologist in January 2017. She's based at the Aberdeen Regional Extension Center. She also is one of the leads on our North Central Climate Collaborative, our NC3 extension team. And you can read a little bit more about Laura there, and we're going to go ahead with Laura's presentation, and then we're going to get back to Vitold's presentation. So here we go.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a little frog in my throat today. My presentation today is focusing on a new project that was just funded earlier this year by both the North Central Region Water Network and North Central Region Center for Rural Development, really to address inland long-term flooding. So this is looking at flooding that's beyond flash flooding or beyond the seasonal spring snowmelt flooding, such as Corey just addressed. The prime example, of course, is 2019, where we saw what I might call chronic flooding over a large part of our region here, the North Central states, both in Missouri River Basin and Mississippi River Basin. One example here is this picture you see here on the first slide. That's literally our backyard, which is typically a corn and soybean farm. This was taken in late August of last year. That was still underwater due to the very prolonged wet conditions in last year. So something that we're seeing very prominently here, at least in eastern South Dakota. So like I said, this is a brand new project. a new project that's just 1 year in duration. Really, our ultimate goal is to kind of collate and collect a lot of what's been happening or has happened in this realm of long-term flooding. And our end product is a white paper, which I know sounds like, wow, just ending in a paper, but the idea here is to outline what are some ways that we can increase the land-grant university's extension capacity to prepare, manage, or mitigate long-term flooding here in our 12-state region. So what's been done maybe has been discontinued, what's already going on, and maybe what's planned and proposed for the future, and how can extension and different pieces of extension in different states maybe even plug in and create even more benefit for people across our region, and not just agriculture, and I'll say that here in a minute. So the motivation, at least for us, for our group, partly, and I think for the Water Network and Center for Rural Development too, was again this very recent widespread chronic long-term flooding that we had in just this last year. And someone mentioned earlier, you know, we had record wet conditions last year. That's true. A lot of areas, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, a lot of areas here. But also previously, you know, we've had other wet periods too. I mentioned 09 to 11 here, you know, really going back to maybe 2007 in parts of the Missouri River Basin. Could also kind of fall into that category. And remember, in 2011 was and still is the flood of record on the Missouri River itself, on the main stem Missouri River. Kind of to illustrate this, as far as flooding concerns, just looking over the last 20 years, looking at FEMA disaster declarations, there have been 51 flood-related disaster declarations in our 12-state region. This is the Dakotas to Ohio down to Kansas, looking at that north central region. Over that time, in those 51 declarations, $935 million of assistance had been granted through FEMA, with over 400 million of that alone to North Dakota. So again, talking about how often we're seeing now these flood-related disasters. These numbers do not include crop insurance, homeowners insurance, other state or local assistance that may have provided, say, home relocation, road or infrastructure repair, other things like that don't fall under the FEMA umbrella. One of the challenges that we see with FEMA, for better for worse, is that they're much better at responding to short-term disasters, say similar like with flash flood or a tornado or something like that, severe weather. Things that have a specific start and end date. Whereas we found that this last year, you know, with such ongoing flooding or say heavy rainfall on top of a flood, how do you start and end that event, that disaster? And I think that's a struggle that we're seeing as one example of why this is an important issue. Overlapping with that, this is looking at some climate data that's kind of underlying our trends here, and this was part of the Climate Science Special Report that was published in 2017 that provided the baseline for the National Climate Assessment, showing that across our region we have an increasing trend in precipitation, as you see at the top map, of annual precipitation pretty much in green almost everywhere across our region. We see a lot, or a handful of areas at least, where their precipitation is increasing 15% or more. That's a percentage basis, not inches. So that can be pretty significant or substantial for some folks around the region. And then you look at the breakdown by season. You know, some parts, say in Iowa, spring and summer are both seeing increases in precipitation, which can lead, to a multi-month wet period if that happens in the same year, for example. So underlying all this again is our changing climate and our increasing weather pattern. So our project here had 3 goals. First is to document kind of existing resources, programs, activities, and what maybe isn't done anymore but had provided some value in the past. Second, something of a gap analysis to discover where are some new areas that extension in particular can provide some further assistance, resources, or development for assisting who are our clientele. And that can be in the ag and natural resource side, but can also be in communities and tribal entities and water districts, or whoever those other groups might be that we consider our clientele. And then third, in our goals here, and again, this is going to end up in a white paper ultimately here at the end of this year anyway, would be to provide some recommendations for future actions, again, to increase our capacity to plan for and respond to long-term flooding. And by long-term flooding, I'm specifically mentioning inland flooding. So this would not include coastal flooding, such as what we see on the Great Lakes here in our region. So really more the inland flooding side. Just to illustrate some pictures here, this is the James River in eastern South Dakota a year ago, which is where I live, flying out of Aberdeen in late March of last year. Just looking south, that's the picture on the left, where the river was still frozen in its banks. You can see there was quite a bit of snow on the ground at that time, and we were getting ready for a big flood at that point on March 27th. Already at that point in the southern part of the river, where it's closer to the Missouri, they had already had quite substantial flooding with that bomb cyclone event on the 13th and 14th of March last year. The picture on the right is after it melted and the flooding that ensued, and you can see how widespread it was. This is looking the opposite direction. One's looking south, one's looking north, but regardless, you can see how the James River, which we call locally the Jim, we're on a first name basis over here, expands well beyond its banks into the floodplain beyond. Some interesting records just last year, just to illustrate the James River and the extreme flooding, long-term flooding we saw last year. At the gauge at Mitchell, South Dakota, which some of you may know, I-90 goes through there, it had 343 consecutive days in flood stage at that location. And in fact, I think it just had a couple days out and then went back into flood stage. Since March 13th of last year, 2019, somewhere on the river, on the James River, has been in flood stage. So for those of you counting at home, that's 13 months now, as of a couple days ago, that this river has been in flood stage somewhere at some gauge on the river. So that had never been seen before, from what I know. And always before, it's gotten some point out of flood stage. So that's really quite remarkable. For this team, we've pulled together almost every state in the region. We're able to get someone to be a part of this project. It's really fantastic. We're hoping still to pull in the last couple that we don't have named contacts for. I left the specific names out maybe to protect the innocent here. But again, just getting to the focus of a wide geography, but also multidisciplinary focus. Bringing people from all parts of extension of ag natural resources, community development, our Eden network, extension, disaster education network, folks who focus on emergency management and safety and climate and water, so that we can get a really broad perspective on both what's been done again and what we can do moving forward. across the region. So we split up our team here into 3 work groups: data discovery, a workshop planning group, and a writing and synthesis group. We had originally planned our workshop to be in person this summer. Obviously, we have to translate that into something a little different online. But I imagine a handful of you at least will be invited at some point for your input in lieu of our workshop format that we had planned for. And then lastly, how can you help? So when we get to that point, we will certainly be looking at a wide range of things. Don't let your hard work sneak by us. Let us know what you've done. If you think we might be missing it somewhere, you know it's hidden somewhere. We'd love to hear from you. I'm not sure if we'll do a survey or questionnaire in the data discovery phase, but if you do, we hope you respond. And then obviously, you know, the workshop part I just mentioned. We're really looking for a broad range of perspectives and impacts, so that hopefully if you get an invite, you can also participate or help find someone who can give your perspective in that. I will cut that there in the interest of time, and here's my contact information if you want to track me down. So thank you for your time.
Hey, thanks so much, Laura. Really, really appreciate your presentation and the invite to the group on the phone or the meeting, and we're going to cut right back to Witold if we can. So Witold, can we hear you? Okay, Janice or Brian, can you help us out here? Witold, can we hear you? Okay, I'm going to go back to questions that we have here in the chat box. And gosh, I hope we can get to the rest of Witold's presentation. If we can't, we're going to have him on in another session. All right. One of the questions was for Witold, so I can't go back to that one, but I'll go right to Laura Campbell. Hello, Laura. And Laura asks, Dr. Edwards, realizing high water tables are exacerbating spring flood conditions, does this project for extension outreach and capacity look at solutions at different scales, such as soil health practices on a farm and regional detention in wetlands or retention ponds? And what about engineering solutions?
Yeah, Laura Campbell. I think that's certainly in the realm of what we'd be looking at. You know, obviously on the ag side, NRCS is a great partner who's looking at long-term soil health practices and managing water in the landscape in that farm setting. So certainly that is something we'll be looking at, and I'm sure we'll be reaching out to our NRCS friends and partners across the region to help us kind of flesh that out as we get working on this a little more in the coming months. Oh, sure. Yep. Thanks, Nicole. Yep, you too.
Okay, so we're still working to get Witold unmuted here. Are there other questions that folks have as we wind this down? It's looking like. And again, if we get him on, we will continue to do his presentation for the folks that are on the phone and or in the meeting and are able to stay on the meeting. But if not, we will have him back to make sure we get his what looks like an excellent presentation. So other questions that folks have for our presenters there in the chat box? One thing I'll ask Brian too, Brian, is it possible that we can still get Witold in through the computer instead of on the phone? And
I believe so. He is on mute, or he will have to unmute his microphone to enable it. Witold, can you try that now?
Yes.
There you go.
Can
All
you hear?
right.
Okay, let's
Definition received.
try that.
Welcome back.
Yeah, no, thank you. I could hear you very well on my phone, so I just don't know what's going on.
And
So
Brian, yeah, hold on, Brian. Let me, if you could help us advance back to through Vithold's presentation, or maybe I can get back there. Thanks, everybody.
yeah,
Keep going.
I can take over.
Oh,
Yes.
he's got it now.
Okay, great. All right, again, thank you everyone for your patience. And I know you may need to get on to something else, but we're gonna work with Witold to finish this presentation for those of you that can stay, and go ahead.
So I finished talking about, or I started talking about the inner maps. These for the large communities, about them in Iowa, and another set of less detailed maps statewide. So these maps are done to the specs of FEMA, and so they have regulatory power for development for flood insurance. Here we see them presented only for context. Another item that we are involved in is flood forecasting. So we have a detailed model, sort of along the lines of what Corey was talking about, but at a much higher spatial resolution. We update our forecasts every 15 minutes. And we present the forecast after inputting the rainfall and also the estimating evapotranspiration. And this is the result of our. So for many communities, gauges of any sort. So presenting a forecast for potential flooding is a challenge. So we solve this challenge by calculating what we call a flood potential index. This index is color-coded, and we can calculate it everywhere on the river network, so even for very small communities. So this is what distinguishes us from the National Weather Service. They have limited number of forecast, points. We can forecast. That doesn't mean necessarily we can do it much better, but because we face the same challenges that Corey talked about. But nevertheless, this is how we can present this flood potential index. And how do we disseminate this information? Well, we build a specialized system, flood information system. It is a non-resource in a free way to the level and doesn't require any password. Google it and you will find it, and there are many different features. I have not. The system is basin centric. You can call it this way. You can see basin boundaries, rainfall, locations of community, locations of different instruments, and so forth. So just a couple of slides from this system. You can see accumulation last couple of weeks or up to. So this is for context. Go there and browse. Activities include developing installation, but more importantly, very extensive out. So we never media, we go to different, communities, different stakeholders within the state, not just emergency responders, but many different communities. And as a result, we were able to bring to the state of Iowa, together with other agencies, $100 million from Housing and Urban Development Agency to improve flood resiliency of certain places in the state. So of course we could not do all of this alone. So we work with many partners, state and federal, communities, and so forth. And this is my justification for the title that there is a model for the nation. So we to integrate. You could see that integrated data from our devices, which we actually share with the National Weather Service and anybody else who wants them. We integrate the data and model outputs from federal sources. So from the rainfall to the National Weather Service, forecasts of stream flow and flooding. So many different sources of information we integrate in our system, the information, system. And we integrate the results of our research. We are a university. We train the next generation of experts. We do studies related to climate,